Over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Very pleased to be with you on this conference today, and I've really enjoyed the discussion that's already taken place and some very interesting questions that I might be able to expand upon during my presentation. In terms of the theme of the day, how do we create change for children? I'm looking really at a leadership level, and I'm going to talk about how creating change for children can also mean creating really significant change for adults as well. That means the staff in the school and parents. And I'm very fascinated with the theory of change. And the reason why I'm fascinated by that is because becoming a right respecting school, it's not easy to define in terms of there's a magic to it. And the magic comes from how it impacts upon a person's values and how they approach their learning, how they treat each other. And I really want us to think today about what kind of school do we want to be and how does rights respecting lead us towards that. Just a little bit of background for myself. Yep, I've been working with rights respecting schools. I've been leading rights respecting in schools for I think about 15 years. So that's a back catalogue in which I can really hopefully answer some of the questions and also give you some thinking. I'm also going to talk in terms of my own doctoral research. I focused on the factors that impact upon teacher engagement in professional learning. And what my research found is actually the quality of staff learning in schools is often not great. So I want to talk about how implementing rights respecting across the school community will impact upon not just pupils' learning and behaviour, but also staff learning. And remember, as adults, we are modelling for every person within our community how we treat each other, how we behave towards each other. I'm also going to talk about how it will impact upon staff well-being as well as pupil well-being, and as leaders, how it can impact on recruitment and retention. And fundamentally school culture. So this is really important. So some of the things I'm going to touch upon today is relational and ethical leadership. And we are working in an environment, and I'm currently principal learning leader of two large primary schools. The school I'm sitting in right now has got over 700 children. School just a little bit down the road has nearly 1,000. So that's a lot of children. That's a big community. And I think it's really important as adults that we are modelling values, attitudes, dispositions, behaviours, language for our children. So the way in which we behave towards each other, the way in which we talk to each other, the way in which we talk to our children is modelling to them how we expect them to behave with each other. And I made some notes, and one of the questions is what do children say about it? What's the impact? And I've written the name of a child here that I've doodled the name of a child here that I'm not going to share with you, but she recently joined from another school in year 4, and she is a very animated and bouncy child. And on her first day, she just said to me, first thing she said to me, "Are you the head teacher?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she had so many questions to me, and all her questions were about how I was going to manage her behaviour. So she asked me if I would put her in an isolation room. She asked me if I'd make her stand outside her office. She'd asked me if I would ask her to miss her play. And so there are probably lots of people on this call who are very much on the rights respecting journey or are committed. But I think there's work for us to be done about spreading that message further and wider, because if we really want to create change for children, we have to send this powerful message out there. The other thing I'm talking about is the power of inclusive thinking and practice. The school culture and our modelling is far more powerful than any policy. So the reason why I said rights respecting has a magic of its own is because, unless Martin can tell me otherwise, is the first thing that you change is your language, the way in which you talk to your children. And the way in which, as a duty bearer, you promote their rights. Yeah, you are there to protect their rights. What that then leads to is a feeling of I am genuinely included. I am included. I have an equal say. I'm an equal participant. I have a sense of belonging. So it's not that the key to think about is we don't want children to behave because they are worried about being punished. We want them to behave and act in such a way because they see the intrinsic value of taking responsibility, respecting others, respecting the rights of others. And this is where someone was asking about what's the impact on your early years. This has to start in early years. So when you first introduce that child into your classroom, when you first do that home visit, when you first meet that parent, it is the biggest thing. We are a rights respecting school. Okay, and I've probably got a lot of slides, more than I need, and I may jump around, but I think my purpose today over the course of the next 35-40 minutes is not to fill you with knowledge and share loads of information, but just to get you thinking of maybe 2 or 3 things that made you sit up and think, wow, I want to think about that, or I need to look at my school in that way, or I'd like to find out more. And remember, colleagues did talk about that there's more information on the website. The third point there is that the value of rights respecting is not just for creating change for children. It is about how we impact upon staff learning and well-being. And my research told me that the single most important factor that impacts upon the quality of children's learning and well-being in schools is the quality of teaching. And how do we impact upon the quality of teaching? We focus on really strong teacher professional learning. Rights respecting is the glue that binds everyone within our community together. Someone was talking about when do you look at books? So the starting point of planning the curriculum and your medium-term plans, central to that is how do we weave the articles of the convention through all our planning? And that then is actually what do leaders want to do? They want children to be independent, critical thinkers, to have really strong outcomes in their subjects, and to be really active, positive citizens. Well, this is the best way to do that because rights respecting impacts directly on the quality of teaching and learning, which impacts upon our children. The next slide will share some of the concerns that I've had throughout my career. And in the introduction, it quite rightly said, the first thing I do first day, if I'm asked to go in, if you're semi-successful in a school, when you're asked to go into another school, it's usually because it needs a bit of help. And leaders will think, I need to solve this, I need to solve that, I need to focus on the planning, the teaching, behavior, whatever it might be. I will, and I'm not saying others have to do this, but I would say on my first day, this is the first step we make. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to become a rights respecting school. So my key concerns during my career, and it took me 8 years to complete a doctorate, which means you do a lot of reading and a lot of thinking. And the concerns that led me through that was the quality of teacher learning experiences. So I did look at other workplaces, health and social care, building sites, lots of other experiences, and to empower me to use rights respecting as a vehicle to improve teacher learning. How do we have a behaviour culture that is student-centred? And some of the things I say, some people believe are controversial. I certainly don't. But I often think a lot of the behaviour strategies, particularly in secondary schools at the moment, are focused on what adults need. But actually what we should be focusing is every decision, every interaction, how does it impact upon our children? And what I mean by that is, the third bullet point is our actions are led by our values, not by our policy. And if those values are underpinned by an understanding of children's rights, the powerful impact upon all within that learning community is massive. How does it impact upon teacher well-being? Because if every child, Nelson said earlier, their child feels that they're respected, child feels included, they have a sense of belonging, they have a voice. What's the difference between that and an adult? There's an article I was just skimming through while we were waiting for the conference to begin. Apparently a third of teachers and student leaders, third of teachers and leaders are looking to leave the profession. Well, one of the reasons they do that is because they may be working in a school which isn't aligned with their values. And this is very much about a values-based approach. But with UNICEF, you have a really strong structure to build that that values-based approach. Okay, so my next question is my next slide has a simple question. I'm not going to ask for feedback, but it's really important for us to reflect on what is our purpose as educators. And I'll tell you something interesting. When I started on this journey 15 years ago, one of the things I was really excited about was the fact that, and I'll come back to that, but now I hear a lot of people saying, oh yeah, that'll work in primary, but that wouldn't work in secondaries. And when you think, particularly in England, a lot of the secondary schools, culture around detentions, sanctions, exclusions, and it's not for me to judge that, but when I first started 15 years ago, there were more secondary schools that were rights respecting in England than there were primary. So it's very interesting to remember that may have shifted over time, but originally there was a real groundswell of support for that. So if we don't understand our purpose as educators, what then drives us? And I'm a great believer that our legacy for the children that we teach will be seen in 15 years, 20 years. And so the language we model for our children and what we tell them, so by sharing with them the rights that they have through the curriculum, I do assemblies every Monday morning. It's the most important thing I do in the week. Children will look forward to those assemblies, but fundamentally through teacher planning, governors meetings, everything you do, the driving force is rights respecting. Why? Because we don't just want our children to be good readers, writers, mathematicians. We want them to have a strong sense of self, a sense of well-being, and an understanding of how to be active citizens, how to create change, how to make difference in the world. And you will only do that if you feel that you have a voice. The school down the road that has got nearly 1,000 kids, it has such high mobility. 22 children joined yesterday, and 30 something haven't come back after the summer. So the reason I'm saying that is when a child joins a school, they don't learn behaviour from the adult, because they might not even be able to understand what the adult's saying, that they don't have the language. They learn culture and behaviour from the other 28 children in the class. And we miss that sometimes. And there are 60 different languages spoken at the school. Every week I meet a child and I learn something new about them. So where does rights respecting sit in between this? It is the grounding, the protection, the structure and the culture that links us all together. And the next slide will just share that in terms of leading organisations use their values and principles as a strategic guidance system. But you can have values written on the walls, but if they're not lived out, and if they're not part of your daily behaviour, and how you conduct yourself and how you talk to each other and how you have a shared language, the power of every member of the staff team talking in a consistent way with each other, because adults have to show respect to each other for children to understand the value of that and to consistently model that. The power is amazingly. The other thing to remember is that I believe in an authentic, right respecting school, there is no hierarchy. So as a principal learning leader, I don't want children to behave because they're worried about getting in trouble with me. I want them to behave because they don't want to let themselves down. I want them to understand. And also we learn from our mistakes. So we don't even use the term senior leadership team. We have a distributed model in which every person has a voice, every child has a voice. And some of the changes we've made in our school have directly come from individual children, some even in Key Stage 1, who have made observations. An example observation that a young Year 2 child made was, she said, it was during one of our ambassadors meeting, and she said, look, and they had a chat in a group, and because it's a steering group, there would be sort of midday assistants, teaching assistants we call learning coaches, leaders, and this young Year 2 child said, I've got a problem. And they said, what? I said, when you have a cover teacher and they don't understand our rights respecting approach, then it becomes very difficult, because we're telling them one thing and they're telling us another. And I had never thought of it like that before. You can give a leaflet, you can say we're a right respecting school, but how would you expect someone who hasn't worked in that environment to understand? So those kids got together and created a child from an information sheet from a child's perspective to be given to each cover teacher to say this is how we work as a school, and this is how we conduct ourselves. And a very simple example of that is our children lead themselves into assembly. When you've got a school of nearly 1,000 children, school's massive. Our children lead themselves because they don't need an adult to tell them how to walk into assembly in silence, how to line up in the silence. And one of the issues you have in a lot of schools is because children become dependent on the adults telling them how to behave rather than understanding their own expectations. The final bullet point at the bottom with values led is how closely balanced are our espoused theories in our school. This is what we say we do. We include every child. We have high expectations of every child. We think every child can achieve. How is that related then to our theories in action when we put children in ability groups and we call them high ability, low ability? Is that consistent with a culture and language of high expectations? So this is going on to my next slide, which is that becoming a right respecting school is what impacts upon the school culture. And if the culture is actually genuinely including every child, okay, and with the highest level of school exclusions that we've, and I might be wrong, but I'm sure I saw something the last couple of days, the number of suspensions and exclusions, including primary schools, is rising. And it's not for me to say whether those individual decisions are appropriate or not, but is your school culture genuinely inclusive? And I would say that rights respecting is a structure that really impacts upon school culture. And like I said earlier, the early years, the minute they begin, and right now, you've still got some children crying for their mum and they're starting reception. When you look at those children at the beginning of the year and how they're behaving and how they're conducting themselves and how they're respecting each other and how they are aware of their rights, and obviously as they get older, they're able to articulate those rights much more. This is where you come to a point where actually the success of creating change for children is starting from how effective we have impacted upon the adults so that they're modeling that right respecting behavior for those children. So we're thinking about the conditions for learning, the shared values, and the shared vision. And on the next couple of slides, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about where some of these, where some of the theories that I've looked at have come from and how they align so perfectly with rights respecting. So part of my doctoral research looked at, for example, workplace learning theories. So what they will argue that more learning takes place amongst adults informally than can ever take place during staff meetings or training days. So how do you create a culture in which this continuous reflection and learning is impacting upon children? Guarantee rights respecting is a part of that. The next one, where is the value of a culture of high trust? If we're all using the same language, if we all have the same values, if we all have the same approach to speaking to our children, to managing, to supporting their behaviour, to empowering them as thinkers and individuals, what rights respecting does is give you the framework. And what happens if you have a culture of high trust? Then you can challenge. What happens when you can challenge? You can set higher outcomes. You can say we can do even more for our children. Because if you feel part of a strong team, if you feel that you're part of a community with shared values, then what that adds is to a sense of what we call social capital. How much we trust each other, how much we work with each other, how much we challenge each other. The next one is genuine distributed leadership. Right. So schools are very hierarchical organizations, and it's because we tend to recycle models from within school. So whereas industry has moved very much to distributed leadership, where those that are at the front facing, so the teachers, they are able to make change at a whole school level. We're still stuck in a climate in most schools in which a leadership team is making decisions which then impacts upon everybody across the school. Part of working within children's rights is that every child has a right to an education. Every child has a right to leisure. That impacts upon the fact that if you've got teachers who are used to children missing play or missing the elements of their education. Years ago, kids used to miss PE because they like PE. Well, this gives you a framework to understand that in a distributed leadership model, we're all questioning, we're all thinking, we're all moving to a case of understanding the extent of how is my actions impacting upon our children, and that gives a sense of teacher agency. So if I'm working in an environment as a teacher where my values are aligned and I feel part of a team, I feel included, I feel respected, I feel I have a voice, lo and behold, that impacts upon your well-being and it also impacts upon your health. And so there's less sickness, less teachers wanting to leave. And I'll give you an example later about how that impacts on recruitment and retention. The final point is the hidden curriculum. A lot of schools say they do this, they do that, they're very inclusive. Does the actual practice reflect that? Now, with rights respecting, you're opening up the hidden curriculum. So when you first implement this in your school, your behaviour logs or bullying incidents might go up, not because they've gone up, it's because children are able to articulate themselves and they're able to share themselves. And this is really about your determination as a leadership team or as a school to really think about what do my children need. And the easiest way to look at that is if I'm a parent and my children go to an outstanding school and 899 children are thriving and mine isn't, my child's mental health is suffering, they have no friends, they don't feel they belong, then it doesn't really matter how the other 899 are doing. And this is about us saying that we want every child to thrive, to succeed. So for those 22 children that joined yesterday, how did we ensure that first experience as they're walking in reflects our right respecting values? And the next slide is just to talk about what influences what we do in schools and how do we mitigate that. So there are factors that impact upon teachers' professional learning, their well-being, students' well-being. There's things we have to do in schools, which is like the national curriculum. We have to open our doors to Ofsted. And so you have national policy and levers of national policy. Then you have the institutional learning environment, and then you have individual teachers' dispositions to learning. Rights respecting focuses on that second bullet point. What do we want for our school? What do we want to create in our school? How do we want our children to feel in our school? What impacts do we want to have on our children and young people? And by developing a rights respecting school, you are creating what we call a really expansive, inclusive learning environment for all, where if a child's voice is respected, an adult's voice is respected, a parent's voice is respected, a child's listened to, a parent's listened to. And underpinning this, I've not talked about the individual articles, because how you explore those, there are specific strategies within how you ensure those children are understanding those and how you teach those. But it does give children a sense of their place in the world, because whether or not you go to a rights respecting school, you have those rights. Every child and young person has those rights. So what we're doing is we're creating change makers. We're creating critical thinkers and independent thinkers who are coming up with their own opinions. And you're creating an environment which children are able to challenge each other and adults in a really harmonious and respectful way. Final bullet point is that each adult has their own individual dispositions to learning, and without going too much into the research, those dispositions are influenced by their life histories and their work histories. I cannot influence life histories, but I can influence work histories. So the environment in which what we create in school through rights respecting is what drives a person's sense of self, their self-esteem, and their disposition to discretionary effort to do the very best that they can for their children. And the more complex the environment, the more that children are struggling, the greater the disadvantage, the more powerful this is. And in each of the schools, each school, and I'll give you I'll go through some practical examples that I was head of or principal of. Each of them was struggling, and I was told that rights respecting, that shouldn't be your priority because you've got all these other things you need to focus on. You can focus on that when your school is more successful. I would argue the opposite. It is the first step to a journey of making, and I don't use the term outstanding. I'm not really that concerned about Ofsted, even though the school I'm sitting in was graded outstanding and everything. That's not our focus. It is the first step to create this really powerful learning community. So I'm going to go through some little practical examples, and I'm going to give you some context, because sometimes people say, well, you're saying all this, but what does that mean in reality? So just a bit of history. The school I'm currently sitting in, I became head teacher in September 2012, literally school weeks after it had been graded requires improvement by Ofsted. Poor attainment, 2/5 of the children were leaving without even lower than the basic standard now, appropriate levels of literacy and numeracy. Very established leadership team, established practices, which is then again about the theory of change. How do you impact upon the theory of change? And very high mobility. I'm going to give you that context, and I'm going to hold that because day one in that school was a whole day on rights respecting. Next slide is a few years later in 2018, when I was asked to go into a school in which they'd had 3 head teachers in the past 18 months, real and justified parental discontent. The entire governing body had resigned, and it was at a school under local authority intervention. So a very disgruntled staff team, parent community. Day one, same thing. September, training day on RRS. Within 3 weeks, a parent forum where about 150 parents turned up to see what are you going to do about our school. This is what I'm going to do, rights respecting, values led. And then number 3, which was the biggest challenge I faced on the next slide, was about a year and a half later. If we can go to the next slide. Yep, thank you. This was a school that had been rated requires improvement by Ofsted, but had then been downgraded to inadequate by the local authority, even lower attainment the previous year. Same situation, high mobility, falling roll. I actually started on December the 9th. So what I said is I'm not going to be visible for the next week or so. I'm just going to focus on understanding the school, the paperwork, the curriculum, everything else. Got to January, first training day in January. We're going to become a rights respecting school. So that just gives you a context, because sometimes we can talk from a theoretical perspective, but what does that look like in practice? Because there's many people on this call who are working in schools, and they want to know, well, why would we do this? Or they might be on the journey. How do we maintain it and keep going further? So I've got a question on the next slide, but just to think about grounding us and continually asking ourselves this as a group of adults. We have big responsibility. Can we really articulate what values and skills a child at our school should develop and demonstrate over their educational journey with us? And I think this is really important, because let's have a look at it. If we're constantly focusing on outcomes, but if we focus on values, can we engender in our children a love of reading? Because is that more powerful going forward? That actually I genuinely want to read. Are we really understanding what our children are thinking and feeling? And we'll only do that if we are encouraging them to share the perspective. In terms of a learning community, you imagine a school with 60 different languages. Well, what do they have? What is their commonality? How do they understand what is expected of them? How do they understand what values are going to be promoted in the school? And within our RRS, we have 7 core values that we talk about and promote, and they're very much related to RRS. So we responsibility, respect, friendship, kindness, empathy, perseverance, and justice. So it's really simple to understand. And the reason I'm saying that is do we teach children the value of kindness by putting them in detention when they do something unkind, or do we teach children the value of kindness by treating them with kindness and enabling them to understand the value of that consistently over time? I'm trying to check, how long have I got? I think I've still got some time. Okay. And so just in the next slide, about what does this mean from a leadership level? What type of leaders do we want? And in our school, we argue quite rightly that every adult is a leader. Okay, so for example, if you're working at playtime with hundreds of children, you are a leader because you have to make leadership decisions in that moment to support the play of those children. If they were waiting, okay, so 11 will go to questions, brilliant. If they were waiting to have to ask a senior leader to come out to talk to a child about behaviour or how to respond, what impact does that have? So and don't call someone a leader if you don't give them the associated responsibility that goes with that. So you encourage every person to work within a culture of we learn from mistakes, we have responsibility, we are there to model for our children, we are there to share our values. So I was asked one time to do, and I'm always feel so humbled and privileged, particularly with UNICEF, when they asked me to share anything about our journey. But I was asked once to talk about what does emotionally literate leaders look like. And I'm sure everyone's had, while I'm talking, they've had an opportunity to read this, so I'm not going to go through it. But these were the things that I came up with. And if you then said emotionally literate students, right, which ones are we saying there? Do the students have a sense of duty and moral purpose? 22 children yesterday, I guarantee you, and I went and saw some of them at the end of the day who'd never, some had never been in school before, right? Couldn't speak English. They were smiling at the end of the day. Why? Because someone would have looked after them. A group of children would have looked after them. Why? Because in a right respect in school, you don't just, I know adults are duty bearers, but you don't just take your own right to play. You have a responsibility to value and promote the rights of others to play. So this is not about telling kids what to do. This is about setting the fire, setting the culture, setting the environment. The other thing I would say is that we, at the other school, because it's in a Ofsted category, you get lots of people coming. We had an associate advisor come in, and that's the same thing they say every time. The behaviour and thirst for learning in the classrooms is just stunning, was the word they used. It's just remember, being a leader of a right respect in school for me is easy because everybody is doing the job that they need to do because they are values led, not because I have to monitor them. So very quickly, I got a couple of slides which just sort of, I'm sure you're all familiar. It's when we look at an RRS classroom, this is very important to me because it talks about self-esteem. Sometimes there's always someone, I'm on Twitter and I get a lot of abuse on Twitter sometimes because I say things like children should enjoy school, because I actually believe children should enjoy school. But some people don't like the term self-esteem, so I'll replace it with self-efficacy. Now, self-esteem is the difference between how we see ourselves and our ideal self. And if you work in an environment in the school where it's all about ability, and you will then judge yourself by the child that's achieving the most scores or getting the maths questions the quickest. And as long as that self-esteem, the wider the gap, the lower your self-esteem. And the argument is by me learning about the rights I have, I focus on the fact that I will see that effort leads to success. And just because I don't understand something now, it doesn't mean I won't get it through the associated effort. And that bottom bullet point is my language and thinking skills are extended. A lot of our behaviour, where we have challenges, and every child and adult in the world has social, emotional, behavioural issues. Everyone on this call gets upset sometimes, gets frustrated sometimes, get angry sometimes. So maybe our expectations for behaviour are higher than they should be, because what we need to do is create an environment in which children are able to articulate their feelings in the appropriate language and their thinking skills, and then manage them in a way in which they're able to self-regulate and impact positively on their outcomes. And the next one's another example very quickly of a rights respect in school. We all learn to use a language of rights and respect. This is not about posters. This is not about gaining the badge or getting the award. The one thing I've always liked about UNICEF is they won't give an award unless they really genuinely believe that this is something that has impacted upon the whole community. And then the next slide, everyone's familiar with, but I think those who aren't with should really think about equality is not just treating everybody the same. We had 6 school values and our kids came up with the 7th one, justice. And I honestly think, and particularly despair with some practices in secondary schools, that children are actually more understanding. And I think Nelson said about, we don't say tolerance, we said acceptance. Children are actually much more accepting that other children might have behavioural needs, might have challenges, often than many adults are. And what we need to do in our environment, and what rights respecting schools do, is to treat children the way in which they need to be treated, to give them an equal chance. And the next slide just gives you a little bit. Some people talk about Ofsted, right? Now, I've had my battles with Ofsted, but I've read every piece of research that has underpinned the current framework. And I've picked out some statements that people might not be familiar with, but relate really strongly to rights respecting, which you might not be familiar with. Martin, you can hold on to these because this might be quite useful. So that second one is important to ensure that leadership of curriculum is distributed. So when Nelson's talking about kids saying what they want for their curriculum within the confines of the national curriculum, that's important. The evidence of the importance of creating a language-rich environment, teacher sensitivity, and lower staff turnover. You wouldn't see that often coming out in a framework, but rights respecting is about teacher sensitivity and also about promoting language. And that bottom bullet point, high expectations and a positive climate characterised by respectful interactions are 2 strongly supported elements of educational effectiveness. Now, do we think all the behaviour policies in our schools in this country currently promote respectful interactions? It'd be interesting to see what some of our colleagues from abroad think as well. The next one is a few more bullet points, and I will be coming to a stop soon. In a high expectancy cultures, school leaders emphasise that all pupils can learn. So we don't set limitations. Bullet point 2, a positive and empathetic environment in which staff know and care about their pupils. The third bullet point cracks me up because all the time on Twitter, people will say, why are children involved in setting rules? How terrible. We're the experts. We tell children how to behave. They need to follow them. Well, we know full well, you'll know if you go into our school, each class has their individual rights respecting charter that they have agreed with. And lo and behold, Ofsted say involving pupils in setting rules can enhance ownership and thus buy-in, and typically does not result in less stringency as sometimes feared. There may be some Ofsted inspectors on this call, there may not, but I guarantee most of them haven't read the research that underpins it. And even if you go down, second from bottom, a supportive climate, good relationship between parents, school, that should have a comma there, and a whole school approach to tackling physical and mental health. And then just finally on the last slide, on the next slide, sorry, and I don't know whether these will be shared with you, that final bullet point, that should be now 12 years. In 12 years, we've spent, even though we're supposedly the lowest rated schools when I get there, we've only spent £28 in 12 years on recruiting and retaining staff because everybody wants to work here. And the most recent teacher that has come to our school in the other school this year as a newly qualified teacher who's a Russian speaking teacher, 100% wanted to work in our school because it's a rights respecting school. We received the Mayor of London Schools for Success Award for 5 consecutive years. That is for the highest progress made by lowest prior attainers. Judge a school by how effective every child does, rather than 60%, 70%, 80%. And I'll stop there. The next 2 slides just has some feedback. I mean, you can put them up for like 10 seconds. This is what Ofsted, amongst other external advisors, say about the school. Bottom one, without any prompting or correction, they line up and enter the building quietly. Pupils maintain good self-control. Exceptionally good behaviour means that pupils are ready to learn. And the next slide is school C, which is still graded requires improvement. This is what Ofsted said. Positive attitudes towards learning. Pupils know what is expected and they rise to that. The right of everyone to be respected is central to the school's ethos and is interwoven throughout school life. Pupils are responsible, confident, and articulate when talking about their rights. Pupils' behaviour and their attitude to learning are positive. So that just gives you an idea of, well, sometimes people can say you do it in one school, how have you developed it beyond? But it's an absolute pleasure leading a school of adults and parents and children. I enjoy it every day. Parents are 100% behind this, but staff, they're the ones who are the duty bearers, and they are the ones. And if one person isn't undertaking that responsibility appropriately, then they will be challenged. It's 11:04, Sam, and I think that is me. So you can take my PowerPoint down. I think we've still got 6 minutes for questions, if there are any questions that have come through. I can't see the questions, so someone will have to tell me what the questions are.
Yes, Kulvarn, it's Jerry again. I'm going to be leading this part. Though we have lots of questions for you, as I'm sure you can imagine. That's been a really emotive conversation and presentation, so thank you very much. I think it was really powerful to listen to your story about the impact RRSA has had, not just on your career, but the schools that you've worked in. And you did, through that presentation, you shared many examples of the issues that have been faced in society and in schools, but the importance of getting the ethos and the values right at the very beginning as you move forward. So I just want to say thank you very much for that. Before I ask a couple of questions, I thought, because you can't see anything, Kulvarn, you might like to see some of the comments that were made. So a couple of examples. It's imperative that we model the right behaviours as individuals. Great point. Dr. Kulvarn is making some excellent points. Love this. We had lots of comments about that. And the actions are led by our values, not our policies. Bravo. And finally, lots of kind of threads around how we make a better society, and this is it. So thank you very much for that, Kulvarn. Some questions. So I'm going to read some out to you that you can't, I know you can't see them. I think that you covered a lot of these comments through the various slides. So some of the comments some of the questions came in maybe ahead of the conversation in your slide, but I'm going to ask them so that they're in one space now. One question. I would find it very helpful to have some tips or guidance on how to get staff on board who are struggling with the value side of things. Staff who are tired and stressed and dealing with difficult behaviours that they don't think can be managed through a relational approach.
Right. So the first thing is they shouldn't have that responsibility by themselves. And it's not just about a relational approach, because whether or not, regardless of any behaviour policy you have in your school, it involves relationship, because you're communicating with someone. So in terms of winning hearts and minds, the first thing I do is I ask we have everybody in the hall, because you can only do that on a training day. You have 5 opportunities in a year. And I ask every person to think of a learning experience in their lives, either as students themselves or as adults, which was successful. And then I ask them to, and they share that with their tables. Then I ask them to think of a learning experience that was really unsuccessful. And I've done this with colleagues in Norway, Scandinavia, England. And the feedback is powerful in terms of them beginning to understand what impacted on them in a really powerful learning experience, and also a really disastrous learning experience. And then what I ask them to do in their groups is come back with what they would prioritize as 10 what we call conditions for learning. For really effective learning to take place, we need these 10 conditions. And then what I do is I look at right respecting and see how these are related. So it's not me imposing a behaviour policy on anyone else. This is you guys saying these are the conditions for learning that enable children to be successful. And that includes a sense of belonging. And I'll give you an interesting fact that you won't know is that I started as a newly qualified teacher in the school that Nelson's working in. And I can tell you at the time, they argued that Newham was 100 years ahead of any other local authority in terms of inclusion. So every child, regardless of their physical, profound and multiple need, severe social emotional behavioural need, was in the same mainstream school, even for one day per week. So we were working with the most challenging children. And I can accept that point that the children that are most difficult to love as a teacher are the ones that need the most love. And you need to see impact over time. So it's not this one person's responsibility. This is a whole school where we are coming together as a community and saying that this is how we are going to support our children to succeed. And remember, a child may have a right to an education, but you can make the decision, if they're not respecting the rights of others' education, to educate them separately, to take them out of the room, to spend time with them, to talk through their emotions. But you can't just stick them in a room. And the other thing to think about of any interaction behaviour policy you make, if it doesn't then have a positive impact on that children's behaviour and engagement, then it's not working. And I think the key is that we're in the most disadvantaged ward. 70% of our children are in the lowest 30% in terms of deprivation. And we have 101 now, after 11 children joined yesterday, Romanian Roma traveller children. And I'm not saying that because we've got low expectations, but if you've got a Romanian Roma traveller children who are not even used to sitting in a room for more than an hour, you're going to think about what's going to impact upon their behaviour. So we're not working in some nice leafy neighbourhood school. We're working in a school which has the same challenges that our colleague will have had, but the impact is even greater. And this is what we've got to think about. What do we want for our legacy? In terms of tired, overworked, those are other things. But I like to simplify everything. If the first thing is right respect and we relate everything back to that, if you've got a voice, tell me why you're tired, tell me why you're overworked. Is everything that you're doing really necessary? Sometimes some of the things we ask the adults to do are not because it's in the interest of the children, it's because someone's going to come in and check that we're doing it. Sorry, I've gone over that, but that just gives us a starting point. And our school's always open for visitors if people ever want to come.
Thanks very much for that one. Just linking to that then, Kulvarn, do you think you can have a values-based approach to your work without it being a rights-based approach?
Yeah, I think you can, because we have our own underpinning values. The difference between the right respecting approach, and I could talk about this all day, but I've got a couple of examples. When you're doing your values anyway, right? We've got our 7 school values and we promote them anyway, but we then use those values to select who we call our right respecting citizens at the end of each half term. But there are certain things that connect those values beyond and to the wider world. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One is when we did an assembly on the International Day of the Girl Child, right? And the feedback that we got from the boys was so powerful, where children were talking about the fact that their grandmother couldn't go to school because in their family they could only afford for one person to go to school and they chose the boy. And we were looking at how, and another boy saying, I'm always treated better than my sister. And so it wasn't about, this was actually about opening up in terms of the prejudices that we see in society. The other thing to say is, first week back after the holidays, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the fact that there was rioting in this country and how that impacts upon the right to practice your religion. And how does that relate to British values of respect and tolerance? And this is about not shying away. This is about actually letting our children say how they feel and give them a voice. So it can be values based, but I think personally, and I've shown it in practice, this gives you a greater structure because the team will have been doing work on assemblies to support us to promote that values based approach.
Thanks very much. I think we're going to have to end it here. We could probably ask lots of questions. There are others, but I'll make sure that I send them over to you so you can have a little look at them. We are going to go for a quick break now, but I think Martin Russell might pop back on just now if he's available. Otherwise,
I am here, Jerry, but absolutely, I think people have really had an awful lot of food for thought, and it's just a few minutes to process what's been heard, reflect upon it, and then we'll rejoin back together for the panel of leaders at 11:25. So thanks so much to everyone who's spoken so far, and have a leg stretch, have a break, and look forward to you all rejoining us at 11:25. Thanks, everybody.